Welcome to C100 Global Wisdom Talks, the podcast where we explore transformative ideas and practical strategies for entrepreneurial families navigating the complex worlds of family wealth, family offices, and governance. Danny Kurtesh and Jan Petke are your guides on this journey as we uncover insights from the world's most brilliant minds and thought leaders shaping the future of intergenerational success. Before we dive in, let me introduce C100 Global, a peer network for entrepreneurial families and families of wealth. Our mission is to empower families to build meaningful legacies and become thriving 100-year families through a focus on dynamics, governance, and strategic collaboration. And now, let's start our conversation.
Welcome to C100 Global Wisdom Talk, the podcast where we explore cutting-edge ideas, strategies, and stories from global thought leaders in the field of family wealth, family offices, and family governance. I'm Danny Kurtesh, co-founder of C100 Global.
Hello, everyone, and my name is Jan Petke, and I'm the co-founder of C100 Global as well. And today's guest is Dave Specht. He joined us today from Washington, D.C., from the United States. And what I can tell you, dear listeners, is just that Dave is just in the inner circle of the very well-known and recommended James E. Hughes. And that was also our first touch point in our consideration and the great interest to bring Dave in our talk today. So, Dave, it would be my pleasure if you can give us, just our audience, just a little overview about yourself, what you are doing, and why you're actually here.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father. I have 6 children,
Great.
And that influences how I feel about the work that I do. My personal mission is to preserve families and perpetuate businesses in that order. And as we talk further today, I'm sure we'll go deeper into that. But when I think about generational wealth, there needs to be more time spent on the people and humanizing these processes and protocols that we put together. But my background is in finance and tax planning. I did a master's at San Diego State and quickly found that the technical issues were not that interesting. And I wanted to focus on the people and how they make decisions, what causes them stress, what keeps them from making decisions. And it set me off on a beautiful journey. I currently serve as the director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. And before that, I was at a private bank, and I trained 2,500 of the top advisors at that bank on family dynamics issues. Who would have thought a bank would invest in family dynamics training for their top advisors? But again, my purpose in my work is the preservation of families and the perpetuation of businesses. So I'm glad to be here.
Amazing.
Thank you very much, Dave. So the subject today is the wealth transfer that we're facing. Everybody's talking about it. Give me maybe your first thoughts about where we're standing in this huge wealth transfer that is coming up from the boomers, from the generation X to the Zs and the ongoing generations.
Well, when we talk about wealth transfer, we need to start with redefining what wealth is. When you mention wealth transfer, and when we see wealth transfer in the media, what people are talking about is financial capital transfer. And when we talk about wealth, we need to lean back on J. Hughes' definition of wealth. And before that, he basically kind of repopularized it. Wealth means well-being. Financial capital is only part of the transfer that we need to be focused on making. We need to be focused on the other qualitative capitals that allow the financial capital to be a blessing to families and the communities that those families live in. If we solely focus on transitioning financial capital from one generation to the next, we will not be successful, and the exercise will be fruitless.
That's absolutely a great statement in the beginning. So I would add some interesting point on this at this stage, and it is what Danny mentioned. These different generation. There is just a generation, let's say from the past. It is what it is. The baby boomers, right? And they transfer their money, and you speak this clearly loud. That is, the whole world is only talking about the financial capitals to a generation with a completely different mindset. And my question on this point is, Dave, can I pick up just your, let's say, your holistic view? What is this wealth transfer actually mean for the families itself, but also for the individuals in these family structures? Can you give us just a little idea what you are considering about, or you're concerned about?
So as I think about a founding generation, many of them started with very little. I'm thinking of many clients here in the United States. Many of them were immigrants from other places, came to the United States with the dream to build something of their own, so they could own land, they could own a business. That generation was focused on surviving.
Right.
And they focused all their attention, all their energy, all their financial capital to creating a business that would someday make the lives better for their rising generation and their grandchildren. Now, when we talk about them passing that on from one generation to the next, first of all, we're asking them to do something that is incredibly emotional. The business that they've created has shaped who they are. It is so interwoven in their identity that when we ask them to pass it on and we expect them to let go and to just let the rising generation have it, it's not likely they're going to do that well. One other element of this, in terms of the rising generation, this is a group that typically is more interested in making sure that their financial capital is in alignment with their purpose. So if they are inspired by something in the world, whether it's equality or environment or whatever it may be, they are very interested in making sure that the financial capital that they receive, that they have stewardship over, that it's being invested in a way, deployed in a way that is aligned with their values. I wouldn't say that the founding generation was necessarily just focused on making money, but they weren't as concerned about the alignment of the capital and their values. So, when I think about the rising generation and speaking to them about what the money means, they're much more thoughtful about how those dollars get invested, and are they doing good in the world?
You spoke you talked about so many interesting points. I want to pick up the first one, and then I'm shifting to the other one. The first one is these journeys that the founders have, the wealth creator has. I mean, Jim Grubman has this wonderful book, Strangers in Paradise, where he also describes this journey from coming from sometimes very modest financial means, and then building quite some wealth for the family. And as you said, for them, number one, it's a journey. It's a journey also for them to get to the financial freedom and financial security. And for the raising generation, the situation looks very different. They very often grow up already in a quite financially well-equipped environment, and they didn't have this trouble. I mean, Jim Grutman calls they're inhabitants of the world of the land of wealth. So, how do you bridge these conversations? How do you make the raising generation understand where the founding generation comes from? Because what I observe in my work with entrepreneurial families is that the founding generation is very often, or they feel very often misunderstood by their kids, and vice versa. Obviously, it's like they're talking different languages. How do you bridge these intergenerational gap?
So there's a couple things that can help us to do that. One is curiosity, and the other is empathy. When one generation is curious about the other generation's experience with the business, experience with what money means, when there's a curiosity there, then they have a chance to understand each other. When a generation is just focused on themselves and are not trying to step into the shoes of whether it's the senior generation or looking down at the rising generation, where there isn't really that desire to understand how they're feeling, what the experience they're having, then they really struggle. So curiosity is one and empathy is the other. I don't find a lot of people in the world that have a great deal of empathy for inheritors. Why is that? Because we assume that inheritance is always good. But with inheritance comes pressure. Oftentimes, inheritors are asked to manage a stewardship that they didn't create. They're asked to spend their energy and their time on someone else's dream. They may put off their own dream because their parents expect them to manage the business that they created, or even just to manage the wealth or to give the wealth away through their philanthropic causes. And so the wealth can be a burden to the rising generation. So we really need to have curiosity and empathy across the generations. And where there's curiosity and empathy, I think there's a great opportunity for financial capital to be a blessing and for multiple generations to respect each other and to help each other on their individual journeys in relationship with the financial capital.
It's a great point. And I would add, let me come up just with a question on this. I mean, these bridging these two generations, like let's say the elders and the youngers, is one piece of a puzzle. The other thing is just if we take a look on these inheritors, these younger generation, and if we raise the question, you mentioned that there is just especially these generation will have a link between their financial capital and purpose, right? And the other thing is just what could be the overarching purpose for this new generation of wealth owners? Could be this from your perspective. I mean, there's a great book, also as me from Dennis Jeff, we borrowed from your grandchildren, the evolution of the 100-year family enterprise. Is it just better to encourage, especially this inheritor generation, to consider to create and build up just a family who will exist over the next 100, 200, 300, 500 years, and probably, perhaps, in 1,000 years? Is this just the new challenge for them? Or could be this the new challenge for them?
Well, oftentimes when you talk about 100 years, it's so overwhelming to consider. I'm trying to get through the day. I'm trying to get through the week. I'm trying to figure out how to make a living for my family this year. So when you ask someone to speak of 100-year plans, sometimes it's just too big. But if we go back to the very basics, the most important thing is that each individual answer the question, who am I? When you're a rising generation and your father or your mother created and amassed incredible wealth, the question of who am I is an existential question that you must grapple with. You
Great.
aren't just an inheritor, but you have to figure out who you are. Because if you know who you are and what your interests are, what your talents are, what your purpose is, then you have a chance. But when you don't know who you are, and when you just live in the shadow of a founder, you're gonna have a real hard time finding joy, no matter how much money you have, no matter how many trips, wonderful trips you go on, no matter how nice the car you drive or the house that you live in. One of the big questions for these families that want to have 100-year legacies is this question of what is the right ratio between creation and consumption? So, founders, by their very nature, are creators and they consume typically very little. They pay themselves last. And so when you think about a rising generation and you think about what they have, are they creating or are they consuming? Now we're going to do both. But what I've found is that those that have a leaning towards creation doesn't just mean financial capital, more financial capital, but creation. Are you building something? Are you involved in a cause that's bigger than you? Those things are inspiring. But when we're over, um, when we're leaning more towards consumption and looking for consumption of wealth to create joy for us or to create meaning in our lives, it is empty and hollow. And I really worry about inheritors seeking consumption and purchasing things to be able to satisfy a longing to belong and to have their own identity and purpose. So I'm not sure if that was the answer to the question you were looking for, but those are some really kind of deep thoughts that I have about this rising generation and what they're faced with.
So let me jump in and give you just my thoughts on this. You mentioned it clearly that these let's say these transformation from a consumer, what you're mainly you are if you are born in a family of wealth, these transformation from a consumer to a creator or a builder, that could be just a very, very powerful transformation for yourself, but it could be also potentially a great burden, right, for yourself. Because in many cases, you don't have any clue what should be structured these or how should be structured these transformation for your own self, right? Because that comes up to your point, what you mentioned, what is actually your purpose of life? Is it just that you live the purpose of your parents, or do you able to create your own purpose? And it could be probably totally different from the purpose of your parents, right? That's number one. Number two, I'm totally with you that the most of us, I'm not, are very overwhelmed if you're talking about, or have you ever considered to have a plan for the next 100 years? 90% of the individuals say, no, I don't know. I'm very lucky if I can oversee the next week, probably, right? But from my perspective, and it would be quite interesting to pick up your view also on this. My view on this wealth transfer is that is just the first wealth transfer what we see in history. But I'm quite convinced the second wealth transfer is standing in front of the door. And that is just my assumption, or just to say this second wealth transfer will be quite larger as the first wealth transfer, because we will see more families with more money, right? And on the one hand, and I'm quite convinced about this, it will be, or we will see an increasing competition amongst families, right? Because it is a little bit of these I've read this in an article, and the article was discussing the term of democratization of wealth, and the amounts of wealth will be increasing over the next decades. We will see more centimillionaires, we will see more billionaires, they will become younger, and that forces also competition inside of the families, but also competition amongst the families. And what I mean by this is just, and it would be interesting to pick up your point, and I will argue this just in a question, how we can encourage families to think about this long-term horizon. Yes, it is hard. It is hard. But for the family itself, but also for the society, but also for the individuals itself, inside of the family, that could be just a great opportunity, but also a great gift to encourage them to sit down and say, listen, yes, 100 years, that could be noble. Let's split it up in 25-year steps. And you have a broader picture. And that could be inspiring to you. It can fulfill your purpose. And then you can make pressure, you can make traction on this. Do you follow me on this? On the
Yeah. Yeah, I would say one of the easiest ways to understand a 100-year journey is not to look forward, but to look backwards. And so let's revisit the last 100 years of our family history and see, where did we begin that 100 years and where are we now? That to me is a lot more easy to visualize because it actually already happened.
Right.
And so from there, we have a chance to say, okay, in 25 years, what would we like to see for our children and our grandchildren? But again, if you're just talking about a 100-year financial capital plan, I think it's empty.
Right.
If you can make this 100-year plan about the development of human capital, the development of intellectual capital, the connection between creation and our giving to society, then it infuses it with so much power and so much meaning that the family will likely get on that path to the 100-year family with great joy and without a lot of fear. And that's what we really need. But I think, Jan, I think it's easiest to begin by looking backwards. So if I look back 100 years, my family was in the Volga River Valley in Russia. They were Germans, German speaking. And actually, I'm not sure 100 years, but maybe close. And they were needing to make an exit. And they did. And they made incredible sacrifices, not for themselves, but for me and for my parents, so that they would have an opportunity to own land, to pursue goals, to worship how they wanted. And so for me to know my 100-year journey looking backwards now inspires me to say to myself, to my children, and one day to my grandchildren, what are we doing with our last name? What are we doing with the heritage that is Specht? And I understand that it means Regal woodpecker in German.
Exactly.
So what are we doing? But honestly, I think, Jan, I think I have to look backwards to have enough context to say, wow, look what's happened in 100 years. And then to say, okay, now we have a chance today to write our 100-year story going forward. But I think it has to be much larger than financial capital.
Let me pick up the subject of the qualitative sides of capital. I mean, as you were right, and as you were saying also in the beginning, and everything is about financial capital. And all the other capitals that a family can have, maybe human capital, maybe social capital, maybe intellectual capital, and so forth, spiritual capital, are somehow, at least here in Europe, seen as a bit like wishy-washy, kind of. Yeah, this is like the feel-good kind of area. It's not really trackable. It's not really touchable. It's like something that is nice to have, but we need to focus on the financial side because, first of all, you can put it on a spreadsheet. Secondly, you can track the performance. You have all kinds of experts that are dealing with this. And the other side, yeah, well, we'll see. When we get there, we get there. I mean, we had this wonderful conversation with Jay that our listeners can already see in our podcast. And we talked about the well-being part and well-being of the whole family and all the family members. I mean, I'm not going to get into the subject of who belongs to the family and who doesn't. That's a total other discussion that one could open. But let's talk about this quantitative wealth transfer. And is this, or what does the family need to understand this, that there are these other capitals that are probably as important as the financial side, if not more? How important is it if you want to go into this 25, 50, 100, 500-year plan to understand who are you dealing with within the family? Who are these people that you go along this journey, and what is like the first step? What do you have to do?
Well, so I have a strong opinion on what a family's greatest asset likely is. And I believe that the greatest asset is not their financial capital. I believe that a family that has amassed financial capital, likely their greatest asset are their relationships that they've developed in developing businesses. And so, I think we underinvest time in transitioning relationships, relational capital from one generation to the next. If I've created relationships with 100 family offices and have incredible business opportunities, but I don't ever introduce my children, if I want this to be a generational opportunity, if I don't ever introduce my children to those relationships, but I do transition my financial capital to them, of what value is that long term?
Right.
So I think we need to also think about relational capital, and that's not fuzzy. There's real financial value in trusted relationships. I mean, when you look at any family business that has lasted for generations, it's because of relationships with their employees, relationships with vendors, relationships politically sometimes that allow businesses to continue to grow, to have opportunities. I'll go on another little tangent here. And this is connected with relational capital. There's a myth, and I don't know if this happens in Europe as well, but you'll have to tell me. We like to use the words self-made. I'm self-made millionaire. I'm self-made. Those words
we have this too. It's I know where you're getting. Please go ahead.
Okay, so self-made is a myth. Self-made is a myth. We don't do anything by ourselves. We work hard. We can learn. We can try. But ultimately, this myth of being self-made is something that I think is actually negative. And for families that generate financial capital, most of them realize that it is a team sport. It's not an individual accomplishment. And when they realize it's a team sport and that it's not just about them individually, then they have an opportunity to really perpetuate not only financial capital first, but also those relationships from one generation to the next. Where we're challenged is when you have a founder that begins to think so highly of themselves that they won't release control. They take all the credit. And when I look at ventures like that, I don't see those lasting 100 years. They have very little opportunity to do that. So let's help dispel the self-made myth. Let's do that across all borders.
Let me add something on. Sorry, Jan, I'm quickly taking over here. If you talk to a raising gen that is very often, I see that very often trying to get out of the shadow of an Uber father or mother or parent or grandfather or and try to accomplish something either within the company, family enterprise, or outside. How do you advise him best to go after, and we talked about this before, their own dream and their own purpose, and maybe also make the other members of the family understand how they can contribute in their way, especially if they're not going into the family company, how they can contribute in the whole, in this whole area of bringing the whole family forward, maybe social, maybe, intellectual, wherever. How do you advise them to go on?
Well, when there's a member of the rising generation that has a pretty clear aim at what they are interested in and passionate about, I think we should invest and encourage them to pursue that, chase that down. But what happens when people are young, many times they try to slam the door on the family business and say, I'm never going back. But many times what happens, they go and get a job, they go and have a few different experiences in corporations that are maybe not family held, or maybe they are. And then maybe they marry, they have children, and then what happens for many of them is they realize the life my family created for me, my parents created for me, I think I want that for my children. And so there's a shift in saying I will never join the family business to, if I do join the family business and I bring these skills back that I learned from working outside, and I can have the kind of lifestyle that my parents created for me in my little town or wherever I'm from, maybe I'll do that. So I caution parents on slamming the door when their kids say, I'm not interested in the family business. It means they're not interested now. They may not be interested ever, but I'm hesitant to tell them to write those children off.
Would you, just as the last one on that subject, would you, I mean, if children leave in terms of, I'm not going into the company, I'm not coming in, that's not my way. Sometimes, especially when there is a larger financial capital around in the family, you have these moments where, as a wealth creator, you think, okay, you do now what you want, but at the end, you will come back with the money. I mean, you can be a great artist and you can follow your dreams, and that's great. But when you want money, you will come to me, and then we'll see what you're gonna do, right? And then all of a sudden, money becomes kind of I don't want to call it a weapon, but it becomes weaponized. Let's put it like this. And this, I mean, in my I've seen this a couple of times, that this is holding this younger generation back of really doing what they do, because they say, listen, if I'm doing this, everybody will be annoyed, everybody will be disappointed, and at the end, I will not get back to this nice life that my forefathers built, and I enjoyed for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, every family has their own philosophy on, what they do with ownership, and will they share ownership with non-operating shareholders. So every family has to make that decision. If the decision is that they will share ownership with non-operating shareholders, then it's really incumbent upon the current leaders to train all owners on what are their responsibilities. What does it mean to be an owner? Everyone wants to know their rights, but I want to know, what are the responsibilities they have? What risks are they taking with the other owners? Do they have any financial capital at risk, as an owner? And so I think it's crucial that what the family's philosophy is on ownership, if they're going to share ownership with non-operating shareholders. But I have seen it as well. I mean, the financial capital can be weaponized against the rising generation, and I think it's short-sighted. I think it's sad, but it does happen.
Yeah. So let's make our final round for today, and I will give you just in an idea, Dave, in regards of these qualitative capital forms. And I have considered, in regards of this wealth transfer, what we have discussed today, it should be needed that we consider just an evolution of some of these capital forms. I mean, the ground of human and spiritual and intellectual will be still there, but I'm quite convinced, and I raise this let's say this capital form quite often, and I call it the relevance and the significance capital. Why I said it is just more that these younger generation, from my experience, is just more interested, or let's describe this in this direction. I mean, you know as better as me. I mean, the whole world is talking about legacy, right? And also talking about purpose and stuff like that. But in many cases, I mean, if you sit down with a wealth creator or something like this and ask, okay, can you tell me a little bit more about your purpose and your legacy? The chance is great that you look just in empty eyes, right? You don't have any clue what this actually means. And on the other side is just if you talk to these Gen Zs and the other generation, that I hear often that they call, legacy is just it's just in many cases just an empty word, because it's only standing in sentences or in letters, but there isn't any action behind these legacies. And the question is more how I can be relevant, how I can be significant for my own family, but also for the society, and and how I can be relevant and how I can be significant. Yes, in the end of the day, relevance and significance will end up just in a legacy. Probably it could be, but this is just also my thought, to encourage these individuals and also these families to consider or to raise the question how I can be relevant and how I can be relevant for my kids, right, inside of the family, how I can be significant for my kids, for my entire family, and if I be relevant and significant, I mean, that will be a spotlight outside of my family, and so therefore that could be a great result. It shouldn't be overwhelmed. It should be clever and intelligence, and it's just, let's say, an easier way to, or alongside of these questions, will be pop up my purpose probably, and also in the end of the day, what could be my legacy. But in the end of the day, if you fill your legacy with relevance and with significance, it will be just a proper legacy, what you built up. and that could be scale up over the next decades and centuries, if you want. And that could be just probably a great way. So my closing question for today, Dave, is it's just a little journey, and I will pick up you just. Can you consider that we schedule in an appointment in 500 years from now, and we are sitting here in this round, there's old gray heads. I don't have any hairs, but 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 can you give us just your idea if we stand there and we look back in 500 years from now, what is your view and what is your perception on the society, on the families, and on the individuals?
It's a big question.
It
It's a
is.
very big question.
It is.
Let me start with something that you mentioned right before, in that relevance and significance. I think the key to that being successful is that each individual creates their own definition and it isn't comparative. We can't allow others to define what success, what relevance, what significance means. Because for me, if I have 500 contacts in my life, and I feel good about what I'm accomplishing, does that make me relevant or not? Well, compare me to someone else and I'm totally irrelevant. But so I think the key is, again, identity and personalizing those questions of significance and relevance. Now, if we fast forward 500 years, all I can think about is my own family. And, with each of those members of the family, I want them to know who they are. So back to identity. I want them to know that whether they inherit financial capital or not, that they are going to be empowered and filled with love that is not connected to success or some outcome that they achieve professionally. So unconditional love. I hope that through the generations that can be something that is perpetuated. When I think about our last name, I would hope that it means in 500 years, not just woodpecker, but I hope that it means that we are competitive, that we are tough, but that we are kind.
Right.
And when I think about that as kind of the overarching view of what I would like to see perpetuated, when individuals have those traits, they can accomplish a lot of things, and they don't have to accomplish it in comparison to the generation that preceded them, but they can have their own dreams and pursue them, but not pursue them alone. Pursue them with a history that believes in them, that encourages them, but also pursuing those dreams, knowing that someone is coming after them that will inherit the expectations that they create. So that's a tough question. I'm going to have to continue to think on that one, Jan. But I know you didn't ask the question for it to be easy.
But
But
it's yeah, sorry. It's a wonderful answer, and it's a tough question. That's why we're asking this question always at the end of our podcast. And I'm not sure that we're going to sit here in 500 years, but maybe in a couple of years and look back and say, okay, we at least brought our family and maybe the ones around us into the right direction. So there might be the chance that in 500 years they're looking back and saying, yes, Specht is not just a woodpecker, it's so listen, Dave, thank you very, very much for the conversation today. It was a real treat. And we really look forward to have you on another time or another subject, because there's so much knowledge that you can share and so much wisdom that you can give also our listeners. This is really something that we treat with the highest regard, highest respect. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you both. This was an incredibly fruitful conversation, and now you're going to leave me thinking with about a lot of things, though.
And it was also my pleasure, Dave. And that is just my inspiration for today for you in regards of this relevance and significant issue. It is just more that you change your perspective. You ask yourself other questions, right? How I can be relevant, how I can be significant. And that is just more a qualitative question. And that should be just the goal, right? So many, many thanks. It was my pleasure, and hope we see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to C100 Global Wisdom Talks. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit. For more resources and insights, visit www.cu100global.com.